My university made us sit through a presentation where they told us girls who drink are 90% more likely to be assaulted. So the solution is simple. No alcohol, no problem. When a guy in my study group sent me explicit photos and I tried to report him, my advisor asked why I was alone with him wearing ripped jeans. Then my laptop with all my evidence was stolen from my locked dorm room, and campus security said I must have just misplaced it. My university protected rapists like guardian angels. On my first day at my college, I had to sit through an hour-long presentation on boundaries. It was being taught by this old man who probably texted through stone tablets. However, the most important thing he taught us was that 90% of our campus's attacks always involved alcohol and other intoxicating substances. The sad truth of the matter is that girls who drink are 90% more likely to be assaulted. So the solution is simple. No alcohol, no problem. I sat there with my mouth hanging open, but quickly closed it shut when I noticed one of the guys across the room staring at me and grabbing the bulge through his shorts. That's when I got the notification. It was my roommate Rachel texting me even though we were right beside each other. She told me that her sister went to the university and was told by her sorority sisters to never report anything. I pinched the bridge of my nose because Rachel was bright and bubbly, the type to exaggerate things for comedic effect. So I just replied saying, "No way," before turning my phone off. But a week later, I realized I was part of the problem because when I met my tour guide a week later and joked about what Rachel said, her face fell. I furrowed my eyebrows, not knowing what was wrong with what I said, and that's when told me. "I had reported one last year," she said, her voice so quiet it could have been mistaken for an exhale. "I lost my scholarship and had to borrow money from my dirt poor family just to afford rent." "What happened to the guy?" I asked. A part of me didn't even want to know the answer. Since I was deemed a liar, the university rewarded him for dealing with my BS. He was given my scholarship. My heart twisted. And one thing about me is that I am a girl's girl. If we have a crush on the same boy, I will let you have him. So now, seeing Sarah sit in front of me feeling completely helpless, I knew I had to do something. I didn't go to the police, didn't post anything about it. I didn't tell a soul, because I was ready to play the long game. I spent the next 2 semesters being the perfect student. I practically lived like a Mormon, never drank, spent my weekends doing Chloe Ting workouts and attending study groups, deleted most traces of my social media. But in the end, none of it mattered, because one day, I was the second one to show up to my science study group, and Jake was the first. I sat down beside him to be polite, and stared at the ground to show him I didn't want to talk. But of course, he spoke anyway. "I'd like to see those pretty eyes do something other than study all day." I swear I thought he was pranking me, but that's when I got the Jake is typing notification on Snapchat. He had literally texted me saying, "I'll show you mine if you show me yours." And when I looked up at him, he had this huge smirk on his face. Dude actually believed he was Sir Isaac Riston LOL. I thought the radio silence between us was enough for him to take the hint, but I was wrong. Because, well, let's just say I was soon faced with the contents of his my eyes only. I immediately burst into tears and started hyperventilating. You see, the last time I had come into contact with anything intimate was when a man stole my innocence during childhood. I wasn't going to mention this part, but now I think it's relevant to the story. Anyway, there I was, crying my eyes out, when Jake put his hand on my back to comfort me, which soon turned into him trying to undo the clasp of my bra. I ran into the bathroom stall, practically rocking back and forth on the toilet seat. When I finally stopped, I decided I had had enough and stormed towards my advisor to ask about reporting. I expected her to comfort me, or at least tell me the procedures. But no. Why the F were you alone with him, especially wearing that? She then pointed to my ripped jeans like they were to blame. I just smiled and walked away, because I had an ace up my sleeve, one that I didn't want to pull out unless I absolutely had to. My daddy was a rich lawyer. He was the one who had put my childhood rapist away, and I knew he would do anything for me. And I had just recorded our entire conversation. I sat in my car outside the administration building, my hands still shaking as I sent the recording to my father. His response came within seconds. He called immediately. I answered on the first ring, my voice barely a whisper as I explained everything. The study group, Jake's messages, the advisor's response. My father's breathing grew heavier with each detail. When I finished, silence stretched between us for several heartbeats. "I'm calling Catherine," he finally said, referring to his paralegal. "Document everything. Screenshot those messages before he deletes them. I'll be there tomorrow morning." I drove back to my dorm in a daze. Rachel sat cross-legged on her bed, painting her nails bright pink. She looked up when I entered, her smile fading instantly. I must have looked terrible because she immediately capped the polish and patted the space beside her. I showed her the messages. Her face went through a series of expressions: shock, disgust, then something darker. She grabbed my phone and started taking photos with her own device. "My sister was right," she whispered. "They really don't care about us here." That evening, I sat at my desk, screenshotting every interaction I'd ever had with Jake. There weren't many, a few group project messages, some class announcements he'd forwarded, but I saved them all. My father had taught me that evidence was everything. Around midnight, someone knocked on our door. Rachel and I exchanged glances. She grabbed her field hockey stick while I peered through the peephole. A girl stood outside, shifting nervously from foot to foot. I recognized her from my sociology class. Sarah, the same Sarah who'd lost her scholarship. I opened the door cautiously. She glanced down the hallway before stepping inside quickly. "I heard what happened today," she said quietly, "with Jake and the advisor." My stomach dropped. How did she know already? Sarah must have seen my confusion because she continued, "There's a group of us. We meet on Thursdays. I think you should come." She handed me a folded piece of paper with an address scrawled on it, then left as quickly as she'd come. Rachel and I stared at each other, then at the paper. It was an address for a community center off campus. The next morning, my father arrived with Catherine and another associate I didn't recognize. We met in a small conference room he'd booked at a nearby hotel. Catherine set up a laptop while the other associate, a young man named Jonathan, arranged documents on the table. My father hugged me tightly before getting down to business. He had me walk through everything again, this time for the record. Catherine typed furiously while Jonathan took notes. When I showed them the screenshots, my father's jaw tightened. "Has he contacted you since?" Catherine asked. I shook my head. "But I haven't been back to the study group. I'm scared to go anywhere alone on campus now." My father placed recording devices on the table, small, legal ones that could clip onto my backpack or notebook. "These are for public spaces only," he emphasized. "Completely legal. If anyone approaches you, if anyone threatens you, we need documentation." That afternoon, I returned to campus with the devices hidden in my belongings. My father had instructed me to maintain my normal routine as much as possible, but normal felt impossible now. In the dining hall, I kept my head down, picking at a salad I couldn't couldn't taste. Then I heard his voice. Jake stood 3 tables away, surrounded by his friends. One of them held up a phone, and I heard my name followed by laughter. My hands trembled as I activated the recording device in my pocket. I couldn't make out everything they were saying, but I caught fragments. Ice Queen, uptight, just needs to loosen up. Then Jake noticed me watching. He said something to his friends and started walking toward my table. I forced myself to stay seated, even as every instinct screamed at me to run. He sat down across from me without invitation. Heard you talk to your advisor yesterday, he said casually, like we were discussing the weather. That was really stupid. You know what happens to girls who make false accusations here? I kept my face neutral, remembering my father's advice. Let them talk. Let them incriminate themselves. Jake leaned forward. My uncle teaches in the science department. My dad just funded the new lab. You really think anyone's going to believe you over me? He stood up, knocking into the table hard enough to spill my water. Careful, he said with a smirk. Wouldn't want any more accidents. After he left, I sat there for another 10 minutes, making sure the recording captured everything. Then I went to the bathroom and threw up. That Thursday, I found myself standing outside the community center Sarah had mentioned. The building looked unremarkable, just another converted house near campus. I almost turned back twice before finally knocking. Sarah answered, offering a small smile. I'm glad you came. Inside, 11 other women sat in a circle on mismatched chairs and cushions. They ranged from freshmen to graduate students. Some I recognized from classes or the dining hall. Others were strangers, but they all had the same look in their eyes, a mixture of exhaustion and determination. A senior named Emily seemed to be the unofficial leader. She explained that they'd been meeting for 2 years, ever since her own assault case was buried by the administration. We document everything, she said, pulling out a laptop. Every case we know about, every girl who's been silenced, every administrator who's complicit. She showed me a spreadsheet. 47 cases over 5 years. Names, dates, outcomes. Almost all ended the same way. Victim silenced, perpetrator protected. Some attackers had multiple entries. I wonder why Jake feels so comfortable being that bold in public, sending those messages right there in the study group room. His uncle in the science department and his dad funding the lab seems to explain a lot about his confidence. Jake's name appeared twice, with dates from other universities. He transferred here last year, Emily explained. Both previous schools sealed his records as part of settlement agreements. My phone buzzed. Rachel had texted frantically. I opened the message and nearly dropped my phone. Someone had posted explicit images in our sorority group chat, claiming I had sent them to Jake asking for feedback. The posts were already being deleted, but not before dozens of people had seen them. I screenshotted everything with shaking hands. The other women in the group watched knowingly. This was a familiar pattern. They'll claim you sent them voluntarily, one girl said quietly. Then they'll use it as evidence that you wanted attention. Emily pulled up another document on her laptop. The administration has someone monitoring all campus social media. They delete evidence of harassment within minutes, but somehow screenshots that make victims look bad always survive. She showed me proof. Timestamps of deleted posts, cached versions of removed content, all showing a clear pattern of selective moderation. My attacker works in campus security now, Emily added bitterly. They promoted him after I reported him, said it showed he was committed to campus safety. I thought I'd been prepared for institutional indifference, but this was something else entirely. This was active protection of predators. When I got back to my dorm, Rachel was packing a suitcase. Her eyes were red and puffy. My parents called, she said without looking at me. Someone sent them screenshots of those posts. They think I'm involved in some scandal. They're threatening to pull me out of school if I don't distance myself from you. Rachel, you know I didn't send those. I know, she interrupted, but they don't care. My sister warned me this would happen. She said the university has ways of making problems go away, and anyone who gets too close becomes a problem too. She zipped up her suitcase. I'm moving to a different dorm. I'm sorry. I can't lose my scholarship. After she left, I sat in our empty room, staring at her bare mattress. The recording device in my pocket had captured our entire conversation. More evidence. But evidence of what? That the system was working exactly as designed? My phone rang. It was my father. I've been doing some research, he said without preamble. 3 of the university's board members are judges. Guess what kinds of cases they consistently dismiss? I didn't need to guess. We're going to fight this, he promised. But it's going to get worse before it gets better. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Sarah losing her scholarship, about Emily's attacker being rewarded with a promotion, about 47 cases swept under the rug, about Rachel, too scared to even remain my roommate. Yes, I said. I'm prepared. But I wasn't. Not really. Because the next morning, I woke up to find my laptop missing from my desk. Campus security claimed there were no working cameras in my hallway that night. They suggested I must have misplaced it. The message was clear. They were just getting started. I stared at the empty space where my laptop had been, my heart pounding. Everything was on there. My assignments, my notes, my personal files, but more importantly, the evidence folder I'd been compiling. I'd backed up the screenshots to the cloud, but losing the laptop felt like a violation. Campus security arrived within an hour. The officer who took my report seemed bored, barely glancing up from his clipboard as I explained what happened. He suggested I check the library lost and found. Maybe I'd left it there. When I insisted someone had stolen it from my locked room, he shrugged and muttered something about students being careless with their belongings. I texted my father about the theft. He responded immediately, telling me to file a police report off campus. The real police, not campus security. He also instructed me to change all my passwords immediately and enable 2-factor authentication on everything. While sitting in the police station that afternoon, I noticed Jake's friend from the dining hall walking past the window. He slowed down when he saw me, pulling out his phone. Within minutes, my social media accounts started receiving login attempts from unknown devices. My hands shook as I watched the notifications pile up. The police officer taking my report was more thorough than campus security, but she warned me that without evidence of forced entry or witnesses, it would be difficult to prove theft. She gave me a case number and said they'd investigate, but her tone suggested not to get my hopes up. Back in my dorm room, I found a maintenance request slip under my door. Apparently, there was an urgent electrical issue that required immediate access to my room the next morning. The timing felt too convenient. I photographed the slip and forwarded it to my father. That evening, I attended my second support group meeting. The atmosphere was tense. Emily explained that 2 members had received academic warnings that week for excessive absences, despite having perfect attendance. Another girl's financial aid had been mysteriously delayed, leaving her unable to pay for textbooks. Sarah sat beside me, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. She'd been quieter than usual, dark circles under her eyes. When I asked if she was okay, she just shook her head slightly. Later, as we were leaving, she pulled me me aside and showed me her phone. Someone had been sending her photos of herself taken from a distance, walking to class, at the grocery store, studying in the library. The message was clear: we're watching. The next morning, I waited in my room during the electrical inspection. 2 maintenance workers arrived, accompanied by a campus security officer. They spent 40 minutes examining every outlet, checking behind furniture, and opening panels I didn't even know existed. They found nothing wrong, of course, but I noticed one of them taking photos of my belongings, including the recording devices my father had given me. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of me from that morning, walking to the dining hall. The caption read, "Paranoid much? Maybe you should transfer somewhere safer." I screenshotted it immediately, adding it to my growing collection of evidence. In my psychology class that afternoon, the professor announced a surprise change to the syllabus. We'd be doing a unit on false memory syndrome and the dangers of suggestion in trauma narratives. She looked directly at me as she explained how some people create elaborate stories to gain attention or sympathy. Several students turned to stare. After class, I overheard 2 girls whispering about the crazy girl who's trying to ruin Jake's life. One of them mentioned that Jake's father had just donated new equipment to the science department. The other laughed and said something about knowing which side their bread was buttered on. I started eating meals in my room, ordering delivery to avoid the dining hall, but even that didn't provide refuge. The delivery drivers began taking longer and longer to arrive, and my food often showed up cold or with items missing. When I complained to the restaurant, they said they'd been receiving calls claiming I was pranking them with fake orders. Catherine called with an update on the investigation. She'd discovered that Jake's uncle wasn't just a professor. He was the department chair and sat on the committee that reviewed academic misconduct cases. His wife worked in the registrar's office. His brother-in-law was the head of campus security. The web of connections was extensive. That Thursday's support group meeting was held in a different location. Emily had received a warning that the community center could lose its nonprofit status if it continued hosting defamatory gatherings. We met in Sarah's off-campus apartment instead, checking carefully for any signs we'd been followed. 3 new girls attended that meeting. Each had similar stories: harassment that escalated when they tried to report it, mysterious academic problems, financial aid issues. One freshman had been moved 3 times in 2 weeks due to roommate compatibility issues after she'd filed a complaint about a football player. Emily pulled up her laptop to update the spreadsheet, but her hands froze over the keyboard. Someone had accessed her cloud storage and deleted everything. Years of documentation gone. She had physical backups, she assured us, hidden in multiple locations, but the message was clear: they could reach us anywhere. My father arrived that weekend with a small team. Besides Catherine and Jonathan, he'd brought a cybersecurity expert and a private investigator. They set up in a hotel suite off campus, transforming it into a makeshift war room. The investigator, a middle-aged woman named Linda, had experience with institutional cover-ups. Linda's initial findings were disturbing. Jake's previous universities had similar patterns: multiple complaints that suddenly disappeared, victims who transferred or dropped out, records that were sealed or lost. She'd found 3 girls willing to speak off the record, but none would go public. They'd all signed NDAs as part of settlement agreements. The cybersecurity expert examined my devices and found sophisticated spyware on my phone. Someone had been tracking my location, reading my messages, and possibly listening to my calls. He cleaned my devices and installed military-grade encryption, but warned that nothing was foolproof if the institution itself was compromised. On Monday, I received an email from the dean's office. I was being placed on academic probation for creating a hostile learning environment. The letter cited multiple complaints from fellow students who felt uncomfortable and threatened by my baseless accusations. Campus security suggesting she check the library lost and found for a laptop stolen from her locked room. That's like telling someone who got pickpocketed to check if they accidentally donated their wallet to charity. I had to attend mandatory counseling sessions or face suspension. The counseling appointment was scheduled for that Wednesday. I arrived to find not just a counselor, but 3 administrators and Jake himself sitting in what they called a restorative justice circle. They wanted to mediate the misunderstanding between us. Jake sat across from me, his expression carefully neutral. He apologized for making me uncomfortable with his friendly overtures. He said he hadn't realized I had past trauma that made me misinterpret normal social interactions. The administrators nodded approvingly as he spoke. They presented me with a document to sign. It stated that I acknowledged the situation was a misunderstanding, that Jake had meant no harm, and that I would cease making public accusations. In exchange, Jake would agree to give me space, and the academic probation would be lifted. The counselor called it a win-win solution. I politely declined to sign anything without my lawyer present. The atmosphere in the room shifted immediately. One administrator mentioned that false accusations could result in expulsion. Another noted that my father's interference was bordering on harassment of university staff. The counselor suggested I might benefit from taking a semester off to work through my issues. The recording device in my bag captured every word. That night, someone slipped an envelope under my door. Inside were printed screenshots of my father's client list, with certain names highlighted. The implication was clear. They could make trouble for his practice if we didn't back down. There was also a photo of my childhood home, taken recently. My parents' car was in the driveway. I called my father immediately. He told me to pack a bag and meet him at the hotel. It was no longer safe for me to stay in the dorm. As I gathered my belongings, I heard footsteps in the hallway that stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, waiting. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the footsteps moved on. Sarah texted me that her off-campus apartment had been broken into. Nothing was stolen, but her personal items had been moved around. Photographs turned face down, drawers left open. The police said there was no sign of forced entry. Her landlord suddenly remembered she was behind on rent. She wasn't, and gave her an eviction notice. The support group fragmented. Some members stopped coming to meetings, too scared of retaliation. Others transferred to different schools. Emily tried to hold things together, but the constant pressure was taking its toll. She looked exhausted, jumpy at every unexpected sound. Then came the lawsuit. Jake's family filed a defamation suit against me, my father, and his law firm. They claimed we were conducting a malicious campaign to destroy Jake's reputation and future prospects. They demanded damages that would bankrupt my family and destroy my father's practice. The university released a statement supporting Jake, calling him an exemplary student who was being victimized by false allegations. They announced a new policy requiring all intimate assault complaints to go through a review board before any investigation could begin. The board would be chaired by Jake's uncle. Local news picked up the story, but not in the way we'd hoped. The headline read, "Prominent lawyer's daughter cries wolf." The article quoted anonymous sources saying I had a history of making false accusations, twisting my childhood trauma into evidence of a pattern. They'd even found my high school classmates willing to say I was attention-seeking and dramatic. My father's firm started losing clients. Some cited the controversy, others simply stopped returning calls. Catherine mentioned that several clients had received anonymous letters suggesting they might want to seek less controversial representation. The private investigator, Linda, made a breakthrough. She'd found a former administrator who'd quit in disgust 2 years prior. Dr. Patricia Wells had kept copies of every buried report, every silenced victim, every cover-up she'd witnessed. She had names, dates, and documentation going back a decade. But Dr. Wells was terrified. She'd signed an NDA when she left, and violating it would ruin her. She'd only agreed to meet Linda in person after extensive precautions. She lived 3 states away now, had changed her name, and still looked over her shoulder constantly. We needed her testimony, but we couldn't guarantee her safety. The mandatory counseling sessions continued. Each one was more aggressive than the last. They brought in my academic records, highlighting every imperfection. They questioned my mental health, my relationships, my entire history. They suggested that my father was manipulating me, that I was too damaged to think clearly. During one session, the counselor mentioned details about my childhood assault that I'd never shared with anyone at the university. When I asked how she knew, she smiled coldly and said trauma had a way of following people. The threat was implicit but clear. Jake grew bolder. He showed up at places he knew I'd be, always with witnesses, always maintaining plausible deniability. He'd wave cheerfully, ask mutual acquaintances how I was doing, express concern for my mental health struggles. To observers, he looked like the bigger person, trying to be kind despite my harassment. One evening, as I was leaving the hotel to meet with the support group, a car followed me. It stayed 3 cars back, matching every turn. I called my father, who told me to drive to the police station. The car peeled off 2 blocks away. When I checked my rearview mirror at a red light, I saw Jake's friend in the passenger seat. Phone pointed at me. The stress was affecting everyone. Rachel had cut off all contact, terrified of being associated with me. Sarah was struggling to find new housing while dealing with the harassment. Emily's grades were slipping as she spent more time trying to hold the support group together and less time studying. Then we got word that Mia, one of the quieter support group members, had been hospitalized. Her roommate found her unconscious in their dorm room. The official story was a sewer slide attempt, but her symptoms were consistent with drugging. She couldn't remember anything from that night, but she'd been fine during our meeting just hours before. Security footage from her dorm hallway was mysteriously corrupted for that exact time period. My father decided it was time to escalate. He reached out to his contacts in federal law enforcement. What we documented wasn't just institutional negligence. It was a pattern of civil rights violations, possibly criminal conspiracy. But federal investigations took time, and we were running out of it. The university's pressure campaign intensified. My professors started losing my assignments, claiming I'd never turned them in. Group project partners suddenly couldn't meet with me. My academic standing plummeted despite my best efforts. The dean's office sent increasingly threatening letters about my lack of academic progress. Jake's uncle announced a new scholarship program for students who demonstrate resilience in the face of adversity. Jake was the first recipient. The ceremony was held in the same building where I'd first reported his harassment. They made sure I knew about it, sending me an invitation to attend. Dr. Wells finally agreed to help, but only if we could guarantee her protection. My father worked with the federal investigators to arrange something, but it would take weeks to set up. In the meantime, she sent Linda encrypted files containing years of evidence. The scale of the cover-up was staggering, but someone leaked that we'd found a whistleblower. Dr. Wells called Linda in a panic. Someone had been asking about her at her new job. Strange cars were parking outside her house. She was ready to run again, to disappear completely. The support group met one last time at Sarah's apartment. Only 6 of us remained from the original 12. Emily brought printed copies of everything she'd saved, distributing them among us for safekeeping. We all knew this might be our last meeting. As we were leaving, we found our cars vandalized. Nothing dramatic, just flat tires, keyed paint, broken mirrors, but the message was clear. Sarah's neighbor mentioned seeing several young men hanging around earlier but hadn't thought anything of it. The police took our reports but seemed skeptical. One officer suggested we might have done it ourselves for attention. That night, I sat in the hotel room with my father and his team, surrounded by boxes of evidence, recordings, and testimonies. We had proof of systematic cover-ups, harassment, and civil rights violations, but the institution seemed untouchable, protected by wealth, connections, and the silence of those too frightened to speak. My father's phone rang. It was the federal investigator. They were ready to move forward, but they needed more than documentation. They needed a smoking firearm, proof of ongoing criminal activity, not just institutional negligence. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a message from Emily. She was typing in all caps, panicked. Someone had broken into her apartment while she was at work. Her backup drives were gone, her laptop destroyed, but they'd made a mistake. Her hidden camera had caught them in the act. She sent the video. Clear as day, 2 campus security officers were methodically destroying evidence while a third stood watch. One of them was the same officer who'd taken my laptop theft report, who'd suggested I was just careless. We finally had our smoking firearm, but the next morning brought devastating news. Emily hadn't shown up for her shift at work. Her car was in her apartment parking lot, keys still in the door, but she was nowhere to be found. Her phone went straight to voicemail. The police initially refused to take a missing person report, saying she'd probably just needed a break from the stress. The timing of Emily's disappearance right after she caught those security officers on camera feels way too convenient for certain people. Makes me wonder who else knew about her hidden camera setup besides her close friends. It took my father threatening legal action to get them to even pretend to investigate. Sarah called me sobbing. She'd received a note under her door, a photo of Emily's student ID and a single word: stop. The federal investigation couldn't move fast enough. Every day that passed was another day Emily was missing. Another day the university could destroy evidence and intimidate witnesses. The support group members were terrified, some leaving town entirely. My father made a decision. We were going public with everything. The federal investigators warned against it, saying it could compromise their case. But with Emily missing and the threats escalating, we couldn't wait any longer. Catherine coordinated with a journalist who specialized in institutional corruption. We provided her with copies of everything: the recordings, the documentation, Dr. Wells's files. She worked to verify and corroborate, building an airtight story. 3 days before the article was set to publish, Emily was found. A jogger discovered her unconscious in a park 10 miles from campus. campus. She had no memory of the past week, showed signs of prolonged drugging, and had injuries consistent with being held against her will. The hospital put her under protective watch, but she was too traumatized to speak about what had happened. Whatever they'd done to her, it had broken something inside. The vibrant leader who'd held our support group together was gone, replaced by someone who flinched at shadows. The university issued a statement expressing concern for Emily's mental health crisis and offering resources for students struggling with stress. They implied she'd had a breakdown, painting her disappearance as self-imposed. But we had the security footage of the break-in. We had the threats. We had the pattern of systematic intimidation. And now, with Emily in the hospital and the federal investigation building momentum, we had no choice but to fight back with everything we had. The war for justice was entering its final phase, and the other side had shown they were willing to do anything to protect their own. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd pushed us too far. And now, with federal investigators closing in and the media about to expose their secrets, their carefully constructed wall of protection was about to come crashing down. The article published on a Tuesday morning. Catherine had coordinated the timing perfectly, right when campus would be buzzing with students checking their phones between classes. Within hours, the university's PR machine kicked into overdrive. They released statements calling the allegations unsubstantiated and harmful to our community's reputation. But the evidence spoke louder than their denials. The security footage of campus officers destroying evidence went viral on campus forums. Students started sharing their own stories in comment sections. The floodgates had opened. My father's phone rang constantly. Federal investigators accelerated their timeline. They needed me to wear a wire to my next mandatory counseling session. The risk made my stomach churn, but Emily's empty hospital bed reminded me why we couldn't stop now. The counseling session was different this time. The administrators seemed rattled, their questions more desperate. They offered me a full scholarship if I'd recant. When I declined, they threatened to release my childhood therapy records. The recording device captured their every word, evidence of blackmail and coercion. Jake's behavior escalated. He showed up at the hotel, demanding to speak with my father. Security turned him away, but not before he'd made a scene in the lobby. Later that night, someone threw a brick through my father's office window. The attached note simply read, "Drop it." Sarah moved in with a cousin 2 towns over, but the harassment followed. Her new employer received anonymous calls claiming she had a history of making false accusations. She lost the job within a week. The support group members were being systematically destroyed, one by one. Dr. Wells finally agreed to testify, but only under federal protection. Linda drove 3 states to retrieve her, taking a circuitous route to avoid being followed. They arrived at the hotel looking exhausted but determined. Dr. Wells had brought everything: boxes of documents, USB drives, even printed emails from administrators explicitly discussing cover-up strategies. The federal raid happened on a Thursday morning. I watched from my hotel window as black SUVs surrounded the administration building. Agents carried out box after box of evidence. Jake's uncle was led away in handcuffs, along with 2 other administrators. The head of campus security tried to flee but was caught in the parking lot. Students gathered to watch, some cheering, others looking shocked. Years of carefully maintained silence were crumbling in real time. My phone buzzed with messages from former support group members. They were ready to come forward now that the administration's power structure was collapsing. Jake was arrested that afternoon. Federal agents found evidence on his devices linking him to the harassment campaign. He'd been coordinating with campus security to track our movements, destroy evidence, and intimidate witnesses. His father's lawyers arrived within hours, but even they seemed shaken by the scope of the charges. The university president resigned to pursue other opportunities. The board of trustees called an emergency meeting. 3 board members stepped down immediately. The judges my father had identified. Their replacements were hastily appointed from faculty who'd had no involvement in the cover-ups. Emily was released from the hospital, though she still couldn't remember what had happened during her missing week. She moved back home with her parents, planning to transfer to a different school. Before leaving, she handed me a flash drive she'd hidden before her disappearance, backups of everything we'd collected over 2 years. The criminal trials began 6 months later. I testified for 3 days, detailing everything from Jake's initial harassment to the systematic campaign of intimidation. Other victims came forward, 73 in total, spanning 15 years. Some had graduated, married, moved on with their lives, but they all remembered. They all carried the weight of being silenced. Jake's defense team tried every strategy. They claimed the encounters were consensual, that I'd led him on, that my father had orchestrated everything for money. But the evidence was overwhelming. The security footage, the recorded threats, the paper trail of cover-ups, it all painted a clear picture of institutional protection of predators. During Jake's cross-examination, his story fell apart. He contradicted himself multiple times, claimed not to remember key events, and eventually pleaded the fifth. His uncle testified against him in exchange for a reduced sentence, revealing the full extent of their coordination to silence victims. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts: federal civil rights violations, conspiracy, witness tampering, and more. Jake's face went pale as the verdict was read. His father shouted something about appeals before being escorted out. His mother wept quietly in the gallery. Sentencing came 2 months later. Jake received 12 years in federal prison, no possibility of early release. His uncle got 8 years. The other administrators received various sentences ranging from probation to 5 years. The head of campus security, who'd been directly involved in destroying evidence, got 7 years. The civil lawsuits followed. My father's firm represented 43 victims pro bono. The university settled quickly, desperate to limit further damage to their reputation. The settlements weren't life-changing money, enough to cover therapy, lost scholarships, and some compensation for suffering. But more importantly, they came with no gag orders. We could keep talking. The university implemented real reforms under federal oversight: an independent office for handling assault reports, staffed by professionals with no ties to the administration, mandatory training for all staff on proper reporting procedures, regular audits of how cases were handled. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I graduated a year later than planned, my transcript scarred by that semester of retaliation, but I walked across that stage with my head high. Sarah was there, having transferred to a community college to finish her degree. Rachel reached out after the trials, apologizing for abandoning me. We met for coffee, awkward but healing. Jake's family left town after his father's business collapsed from the scandal. Their mansion went up for sale, the proceeds going toward victim settlements. I heard Jake was attacked in prison by another inmate whose daughter had been assaulted on campus. He survived but spent months in the infirmary. Dr. Wells became an advocate advocate for institutional reform, though she still used her assumed name and avoided public appearances. She consulted with other universities on preventing similar cover-up cultures. Linda, the private investigator, started specializing in campus assault cases, helping other families navigate hostile institutions. The support group reformed under new leadership, this time with official university recognition and funding. They named it after Emily, who never fully recovered from her ordeal, but sent a letter to be read at the first meeting. Her words were simple but powerful. Keep fighting, keep supporting each other, keep refusing to be silenced. I started law school the following fall, inspired by my father but determined to forge my own path. Constitutional law fascinated me, particularly civil rights protections and institutional accountability. My personal statement was honest about my experience, and several schools accepted me despite my imperfect transcript. Federal raids with black SUVs and box-carrying agents. Nothing says Thursday morning at college quite like watching your administration get the full crime show treatment while students grab popcorn between classes. During my first year, I got a call from a freshman at my old university. She'd been assaulted, but this time the system worked. Her report was taken seriously, investigated properly, and her attacker expelled within a month. She thanked me for what we'd done, for making it possible for her to get justice. I cried after hanging up. My father's practice recovered and grew. He became known as the lawyer who'd taken on an entire university and won. But he was careful about which cases he took, avoiding the spotlight and focusing on helping victims rather than building fame. Catherine was made partner, her meticulous documentation having been crucial to our victory. 3 years later, I was studying for the bar exam when I learned Jake had been unalived in prison. Another inmate serving life for murdering his daughter's rapist had cornered him in the shower. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not sadness, just a hollow acknowledgement that his story had ended. His uncle was transferred to protective custody after that. The university continued under federal monitoring for 5 years. Reported assaults actually increased during that time, not because more were happening, but because victims finally felt safe reporting. The culture had shifted. It wasn't perfect, would never be perfect, but it was better. I passed the bar on my first attempt and joined a small firm specializing in civil rights cases. My first client was a college sophomore whose assault had been mishandled by her school. We won, setting a precedent that made institutions more liable for protecting perpetrators. It was a small victory in an endless fight, but it mattered. On the 5th anniversary of the federal raid, the local paper ran a retrospective. They interviewed dozens of people affected by the changes. Sarah, now a social worker, talked about rebuilding after trauma. Several current students expressed gratitude for the safer environment. Even some administrators acknowledged the reforms had been necessary. I declined to be interviewed. My part in the story was over. I'd played the long game and won, but the victory had come at a cost. The nightmares still came sometimes. Trust remained difficult, but I'd learned to live with the scars, to build something meaningful despite them. The last time I visited campus, I stopped by the building where it had all started. A plaque by the door listed resources for assault victims. Inside, where Jake had first harassed me, students studied peacefully. The world hadn't changed, not really, but this small corner of it had become a little bit safer, a little bit more just. I thought about Emily, still struggling with trauma, about the 73 victims who'd come forward, about all the ones who hadn't, who'd suffered in silence. We'd won our battle, but the war continued on other campuses, in other institutions. All we could do was keep fighting, keep supporting each other, keep refusing to be silenced. My phone buzzed. A new client, another student failed by her university. I scheduled a consultation for the next day. The work never ended, but that was okay. Every case was a chance to hold another institution accountable, to protect another victim from what we'd endured. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was the one I'd chosen. And despite everything, I had no regrets. Well, folks, that really was something. So many things to wonder about, and somehow we made it through together. For now, thanks for being here. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.